Hey, welcome to That Chewy Jesus Chick. I'm Tema, if we haven't met. Today, I'm going to teach you as much as I can about what YouTube taught me regarding painting watercolor portraits like the one you're looking at. And YouTube taught me everything I know. Let's get into it. As you watch what I'm doing on the screen, I'm going to tell you about the way that YouTube taught me, some of the artists I've learned from, as well as the techniques I'm using as you're watching me paint this lovely lady. Now, while I have also learned from Loomis and Riley and have taken a Skillshare course or two, #not sponsored, much of the time for my portraits, I'm still out here tracing out faces and painting them. As you can see here, I'm using my iPad to trace the reference image right off of Pinterest onto my watercolor paper directly. Tracing is not only okay, but it's very useful, especially when you want the people that you're painting to look like the people that you're painting, which is really tricky, especially when you're first starting out making portraits. So trace away, I say. The way I've managed to trace most easily is to put the image of the person onto a page in Adobe Fresco. I turn off all the lights in the room so that the luminosity of the iPad will shine through my watercolor paper directly. You can clip your paper to the iPad using little metal clips. That works better. In this case, I was trying to go quickly, so I just sort of laid it on top and very gingerly traced the image. The reason I started tracing directly off of my iPad is because I don't own a printer. Yes, folks, it is 2024, and I don't own a printer. My suggestion is always to pencil everything in lightly with a sharpened pencil. That way, if you have to erase or you want to change something, it doesn't leave you with major marks on your watercolor paper, even after erasing. And I always suggest using a kneaded eraser because it will lift the graphite without harming your paper. After I turn on the light and review the image, typically there are some minor imperfections with how I've traced it, and I need to take a minute or two and adjust all of my lines and make sure that everything actually looks the way I need it to going forward. In this painting, I'm using masking fluid, which you've probably seen before. It's liquid latex, and you can apply it to your watercolor paper in order to protect the white of the paper as you paint over top of it, but only after it's dried. After you've painted over top of it and the watercolor paint has dried. It's then able to be peeled off, and it should reveal a white, untouched highlight. YouTube taught me that a lot of artists don't like using masking fluid. Conversely, another artist on YouTube by the name of Art is Blue has shown me that there are many ways to use masking fluid. If you watch her speed paints and shorts, you'll clearly see she applies it at the beginning to protect the white of the paper, and then intermittently will remove it and add it on top of other layers, leaving multiple various colored highlights of different colors showing through at the end. This is an excellent technique that I had never seen before watching her paint. She and I have different ways of painting, and she's very illustrative with her style. Man, her stuff is so stunning. It blows me away. Now on the topic of highlights. One of watercolor's finest achievements is the fact that we get to see the glow of the paper shining through the pigments, as well as alongside the pigments when we preserve the white of the paper in order to represent the highlights on whatever it is on our portrait that would be catching the light. This stark lightness compared to a dark color of paint, if you can manage to place the darkness right up against that white highlight, creates the most beautiful contrast in the finished piece. But we'll talk about the importance of contrast in watercolor in just a minute. In my painting on the screen, you can see I've started to apply the base skin color. And though I'm not mentioning specific paints I'm using here, I can tell you in the comments if you're interested in what I used. The reason I don't focus on paint color is because another thing I've learned from YouTube is you can choose any colors you want, whatever looks good to you. Opaque watercolors, transparent watercolors, and in any color you desire. The important thing that you want to focus on when you're laying down your colors is the value that will result from the color and the concentration of pigment to water you use when applying it. Any colors you use will read appropriately if you can get the value right. Let's talk about another YouTube artist who I adore the work of. Her name is Agnes Cecile. She uses all variety of colors to create her portraits, but you will have no difficulty discerning what it is you're looking at. By the way, each of the portrait artists I'm talking about in this video will be linked below for you to go and watch and learn from as I have. Now regarding values. Because I want to get them right and not go too heavy all at once or stop too soon, leaving the values too light, I build layer after layer when I paint. This allows me to manage the values much more accurately and easily. You will see, however, in this particular painting that I went in too heavy in a few spots and ended up having to lift a lot of pigment in order to get my values correct. And this works really well here because the pigments I was using were non-staining. If you like to paint in such a way as to utilize a lot of lifting in order to get the values right in your work, you'll want to avoid staining pigments because they're very difficult to lift off the paper. Something I didn't learn early enough, though it was explained to me. Luckily here, I was able to easily lift these highlights out, and that honestly saved this painting. Now, while I finish adding to this unaesthetic looking layer of paint, I'm not sure if this is just me. It probably is. I'm a super unaesthetic person. My watercolor paintings look like a terrible mess has occurred on the paper for at least the first half of the painting, instead of a piece of art. I see all of these other watercolor portrait artists like Lioba Bruckner, whose pieces look like literal perfection from the first brush stroke until the last, with never a fleeting moment of so much as an unpleasant line placed down. Have you guys seen her portraits? Her use of color and composition are chef's kiss. Mine, on the other hand, well, you can see for yourself. I say this also, though, to remind you to always trust the process. We hear this all the time, but this is a perfect example because I think in the end, you'll appreciate where this painting goes. Sometimes it isn't until right at the bitter end that everything kind of pulls together, and hopefully you'll agree that that's what happens with this portrait. Now, while I finish adding to this unaesthetic layer, I want to share with you the reason that I decided to make a watercolor portrait tutorial. When it comes to portrait art, at least on YouTube, there are only a few handfuls of artists, and each of them has a very unique, recognizable art style. To name a few, we have Paulina Bright, Agnes Cecile, as already mentioned, Emily Olsen, the extremely talented Hamrib Art. Her work is outstanding, though it's most often in gouache, which I don't yet paint in, but I do want to learn. We also have Tuta Art, and somewhat more recently, an artist named Emily Hughes, and another newer channel called Boxes of Sheep. Someone also using a lot of bright and vivid color is E.S. Prathur. And then, of course, there's Jane Beta, who I learned so much from, though sadly, she doesn't upload much anymore. Now, don't misunderstand. I've learned from so many other artists on YouTube. The list is long, but mostly I'm just focusing today on the few artists on YouTube who make portraits in watercolor. We be a small group, folks. Now, one thing I have going for me is the fact that I don't have an art style. Let me explain. Most artists who want to sell their work understand that having an art style is a necessity. They need their work to be recognizable and recognizably linked to their name in order to create a following, which makes perfect sense and is extremely valuable. But one thing I can offer you through my unaesthetic, very messy, late to pull together portraits is that while I'm not a professional artist, I can at least show you a whole variety of different portrait subjects painted in a whole variety of different ways. This kind of allows you to see from video to video a whole paint-through process and how the end result is achieved while also ultimately ending up with pieces that look completely different in style from one another. I think this allows for your creativity to really take hold through watching. I say this because this is what I experienced and I'm going to tell you about it now. But despite all of those massively talented, crazy, well-loved portrait artists who I mentioned, teaching me how to do exactly what they did, the artists who I ultimately learned the most from were the artists who were a lot like me, doing what I'm doing here on YouTube. The people who told stories and painted, and I swear I watched and rewatched those people so many times, seemingly absorbing their knowledge right through the screen. Osmosis, if you will. I also know that's not really how osmosis works. Once I had a few key questions answered about how I should be using watercolor, and there are countless beginner tutorials like this available on YouTube to help answer these questions for you if you're at this stage. I found that most of the art education I received on YouTube after that came from just watching and observing the artists whom I most loved watching make art. That's an awkward sentence. Okay. You see, for me, and maybe you too, those of us trying to watch on YouTube to learn to paint so that we can make things that we enjoy and to give away to family and friends, and just as a hobby, it can be challenging to find videos that reflect the sort of style of art you might have in your head for whatever piece it is that you're trying to create. And if you want to emulate that style, you need to see somebody doing it. And the likelihood that you'll see them doing it is somewhat small if it's not one of the styles of these very talented artists I've named. But here comes that Jewy Jesus chick to the rescue. Like I said, you use what you've got. And eventually, I will have a whole lot of videos on this channel, and in each one, there will be a portrait being completed, pretty much start to finish. In fact, 6 of the 7 videos I've already uploaded have a portrait in them, and many are start to finish. You can watch these and listen to me telling the story, and then you'll be able to see a painting being completed, start to finish, always in a very different art style from the previous one. As I go along on this art journey, I find that I want to experiment with many different types of painting and hopefully get somewhat skilled at all of them without focusing too much on making a style for myself until that sort of maybe organically happens and I find one thing I just want to stick to always. So now that we've answered that question and we're finally, praise Jesus, moving into the piece of the portrait that looks a little bit more like a human being and like the idea of what we expect from a watercolor portrait, let's talk a little bit more about the specific concepts I've gathered over the years from watching YouTube that will serve to make any portrait stand out and really shine. I will give you a hint. Contrast. Another word for contrast is conflict. Conflicting things. A light and a dark. A warm and a cool. A hard edge and a soft edge. These are the things that make art shine. Anytime you look at a piece of art, watercolor or otherwise, and you say to yourself, oh my goodness, that is glowing, or it just draws your eye in. This certainly happens when you look at photographs or honestly anything that has a lot of contrast and things that are in conflict with each other. It's certainly the spice of life, at least art life, not real life. Real life is way better when it's peaceful and doesn't have a lot of conflict, but that's a whole other story. So you can see clearly in this painting the darkness of the shadows and how they play so well up against the white of the paper. If you look at the lips of the woman in my portrait, which I did fill in with the first layer of color off camera, we look at the white of the paper, which was protected by the liquid latex, which I had removed after adding that layer of color. And that, up against the very dark value color of her lips, creates so much stunning contrast. It's something I could look at forever. Right now, I'm going to give you a quick tip that can honestly change your art. And I'm just throwing this in for those of you who have been so kind as to stay through this middle portion of the video. I really appreciate you guys. My dog is making so much noise. That's not the tip. I'm sure you can hear it on the recording. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go, the tip. Anytime you're creating shapes in your portraiture, like with your brush strokes and just generally looking at your shadows and trying to make them into some kind of a shape that's pleasing to the eye, seek out situations where it's appropriate to put in 3 different sizes of shapes right next to each other, like a small, a medium, and a large. You can see on her lips in the highlight, again, where I removed the masking fluid from the paper, revealing the white of the paper. What I was going for was to make 3 distinctly shaped highlights, one slightly bigger than the previous. Something about that our brains love as human beings. We just love to see it. Okay, so that's my tip. Shadow shapes, highlight shapes, any shapes in 3 similar but ascending or descending size patterns will bring a lot to your art. Another thing that you can use in your painting that you'll see in this piece as we get closer to the finish is any place that you can utilize a warm color that blends into a cool color. When I paint her headscarf, you'll see that I do that. I include a greenish shadow color and a yellowish shadow color with a purple cool shadow color. Okay, now as far as techniques go, the final technique I want to talk with you about in this video is the use of edges and varying kinds of edges. My suggestion, anytime that you can incorporate an interesting edge into your work, I say go for it. There are different kinds, of course. We have soft edges. That's when you blend one color into the next and there's no firm delineation between the 2 colors in terms of a line or a hard stop. Soft edges are also used when you blend color from an area of high pigmentation into an area of paper white, essentially. Just kind of getting more and more dilute until it just bleeds off. That's also considered a soft edge. And what I've found to be the most attractive, personally, is something I'm going to describe in just a moment regarding edges. But first, I want to give a caveat that some people paint with only hard edges and their work is breathtaking. There's an artist by the name of Nick Runge, who I don't believe is on YouTube, but I've found him on Pinterest, and he incorporates only the use of hard edges in his work, and it is absolutely stunning. It's a very unique style of painting. Now back to what I was saying, the way I paint and the way you've probably seen me paint in my other videos if you've seen them is to use mostly soft edges until the later layers of the portrait. Edges that are hard often are used to bring attention to the area of the portrait that you want people to look at. So, for example, one would assume in this portrait that I want people to look at her arm because I've used on her arm and hand a whole lot of hard edges. But no, you'd be wrong. That was just me being a poor artist and not planning my work properly. And like I said, in the end, I really enjoy the way this piece looks, and I almost do appreciate the attention that is drawn to the hand. But as the process was going along, doesn't look so good. Doesn't look so good. But we're trusting the process, right? And the other thing is I didn't mind the idea. Most artists who have gone to school for art or are classically trained understand that before you paint anything, it's a good idea to discern what your focal point is going to be and to highlight that with the work. But I'm just a YouTube trained artist, so I didn't do that. Now, I mean, I'm getting better, I hope, at remembering to ensure that whatever I'm highlighting with my hard edges is the thing that I want to draw attention to. And in many paintings, I do this. But in this particular painting, I just loved the whole reference piece so much, and I just wanted to paint it. I didn't care where the attention was going to be at the end. And it sort of went along. It sort of took on its own life and made its own attention, and here we are. So don't worry about that, especially if you're just starting out, and especially if you're not trying to sell your work. It doesn't matter. Just paint. Just have fun. And I'm not saying that a didactic education where you understand what's important in each piece is lacking in value, because that is not the impression I'm trying to give here. I highly respect that. And as time goes along, I am learning more and more about the things that are considered beauty standards in art, so to speak. But we also all know here that we can break those beauty standards anytime we want, right? Right. Okay. So, edges. Add your hard edges in later in the painting if you want to. And typically that will serve you better by allowing you to use those edges to draw the eye to the piece of the painting that you most want to highlight. Yes, that is what I was trying to say. Now, as we get to the end of this piece, you're going to see that I am able to utilize lost edges when I paint the headscarf, and I'm also able to incorporate an overlay between the background and the subject's hand. It kind of brings everything together ultimately and incorporates the woman with the background. I've used both warm and cool colors in the background by interjecting a little bit of yellow into the green to kind of warm it up. And honestly, I think that the background and the headscarf for this piece are the most interesting parts, despite the fact that they took about a tenth of the time that the rest of the portrait took. That, my friends, is called a lesson learned. I'm working hard to add more freedom to my paintings and create a greater looseness. And I think to some degree I did achieve that here. But like I said in the beginning, it sort of came at a cost of me messing with the pigments a lot. In my opinion, and if you disagree, please tell me down below, I don't see this piece as looking terribly overworked, with the exception of her hand. I'm not super satisfied with the way the hand turned out, but because I like the piece so much, I really don't care. And it was so much fun to paint. Like, I had the very best time ever painting this. And using the Polina Bright brushes, folks, not sponsored once again, but I love these brushes. I think they are just as fantastic as she says they are. They're a little bit light handled, but once you get used to that difference from maybe some of your other a little bit better balanced brushes, these have all the weight at the front end, so it can be a bit of a learning curve. But once you start working with them, you will not want to stop. I will buy merch from any creator that I just adore and want to support, but I'm not buying the merch in order to be like my number one art tool. I'm buying it because I love what that person has brought into my life through their work. And I want to back that up with my dollar, if that makes sense. But in this case, I really wanted to try these brushes. Watching Polina Bright paint with them is like watching a ballerina in toe shoes, like dancing. It's it's beautiful to see, and the experience of painting with them, in my opinion, is just as beautiful. So if you've been considering it and it's in your budget, I would go for it. Okay, but totally back to the painting. I don't want to worry over my paintings because I think it translates in the way that they look. And also, that's not the point, you know? The point is to have fun and learn and grow, and not to be super pristine or precise or tight and tense and walk away from a painting session all cramped up. That is like never what I'm looking for. So I'm trying to actively remember this every time I paint. If you've stuck around this long, I'm going to ask you to stay a little bit longer, because right now I have something I want to talk about that is, in my opinion, more important than anything else I've shared in this video. So let me cut to this pre-recorded piece that I made earlier. If you like watercolor art and respect people who have taught themselves art using nothing but YouTube and their love for creating in this medium, then you guys are going to adore the first person who I've asked to be a part of the Passing It Along callouts. But what are these callouts? Let me quickly explain what these are. If you're anything like me, you're probably chronically on YouTube. I'm listening to videos while I cook, clean, walk the dogs, put my makeup on, whatever else I'm doing. I'm semi-watch listening to YouTube while I'm making art myself, kind of glancing up at the video and mostly listening to it and feeling this sense of, yeah, we're doing this together. One of the things over the years that's frustrated me when I would enjoy something a video creator was doing with their channel or talking about in every video, and I would feel some sense of connection or like kinship with them and talk about it in the comments and be sure to watch every single release they put out, watching it all the way through to the end, even if I got distracted and had to like come back later and watch it again. I would still let it play all the way through, even the ads, in order to support their hard work. And while I was rewarded, certainly initially, from the learning process that I went through due to watching their video or from enjoying the entertainment value, whatever it was, it always has, and still to this day actually does, make me a little sad when the person chooses not to respond to my comment or not even put the little heart thing next to it saying they've read it. And while there is no expectation from me that they have to do this, I still want them to, you know, it like kind of burns when they ask us to like the video and subscribe and watch and turn on notifications, and then they don't respond in kind, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not referring to channels with millions of subs where doing so would be almost impossible. I'm mostly referring to like new creators like me who are fresh and they say they're so grateful for every view, yet they don't show that in their actions. And something I've learned in life is show, don't tell. I mean, tell also, but show for sure. When I was mentally planning to start my own YouTube channel, I knew I wanted to do whatever I needed to do to avoid making anyone who was kind enough and supportive enough to subscribe and like and watch and do all the things feel that way ever because of me. And I wrote right in my channel description that I want this to be a community. And accordingly, we need to lift each other up. That's what a community does. Therefore, this pass it along end of my videos piece that I hope to do in as many videos as there is interest from you guys behind. Does that make, words. I want you to share your art with me or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be art. It can be any passion project, small business, nonprofit, anything you're personally involved in that either brings joy to your life or something good into the lives of others, and you would like some free press on the topic in order to bring more good stuff potentially into the lives of others and into your life potentially. So let's get into the story of this lovely lady, Susan Dove, who is the very first participant in this little Passing It Along program. Susan writes, "It has been 7 years since I decided to return to art. I say return because I can remember loving art since I was a small child. I drifted away from it in my teens and briefly revisited it in my early 30s during some art courses in college. Since I was diagnosed at age 10 with a genetic condition that causes blindness, retinitis pigmentosa, I didn't think art was something I should pursue. In fact, it made me quite depressed to think about losing my eyesight and continuing to try. In 2017, I was going through a crisis when my sight loss started to increase rapidly and I was forced to look for resources to adapt. This suddenly included a new place to live. I didn't know it at the time, but this would also include the dismantling of close relationships that were not healthy. It was quite a lot to go through all at once. I moved again and then went to stay at a DV shelter. While I was there, I decided to go into my storage one day and pulled out some old pastel chalk to see what I was still capable of. It turned out to be very therapeutic. I found that I could control the values enough to feel as if I could see more than I actually could. High contrast is important to people with RP. Colors were very difficult, but I tried to let go of what colors ended up where. In 2019, I bought my first watercolor set and explored other mediums, paints, etc. as well. I love them all. My relationship with God also became very deep and seemed to enhance every aspect of my new life. It was quite profound and very personal, so a lot of it is hard to explain. In fact, all areas of my life, especially my relationships with my children and my extended family, have improved dramatically. Speaking of children, I have two. My oldest is 29. Actually, he'll be 30 this year. And my youngest, he's 18 at the end of this year. I can't believe it, but I'm turning 53 in June. LOL. Currently, I'm working to bring awareness to people with low vision and their unconventional interests and talents. It's just amazing to me what human beings can do despite incredible challenges and overwhelming circumstances. When you have determination and you question your own beliefs in yourself, anything is possible with God. Job options are very limited for people with disabilities, let alone people with vision loss. While I continue to work with the Blind Commission in seeking employment, I would love to sell my art and hopefully work with other people with low vision who might have doubts that they can also enjoy visual art. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my story with you and this audience. Hey, Susan, thank you so much. As you know, we've communicated a lot in the last week, and it's been a real gift to me. I'm so grateful I've, met you over email and so forth. And I just want to thank you for opening yourself up and sharing your story, which no doubt has been a tremendous up and down sort of a story, kind of like life. And yours has some interesting caveats. You are inspiring to me, Susan, and you can see how incredibly talented this woman is. And then you consider that she's made these paintings with minimal vision, and I am just blown away. As far as being able to reach her, I've listed the information about how you can reach Susan down below if you're interested in purchasing any of her paintings, or if you just want to compliment her work, if you want to reach out with any opportunities for employment or otherwise in the Portland, Oregon area, which I believe is where Susan is living. So all of the information about how to take part in this Passing It Along program that I'm hoping to continue doing in as many videos as there is interest from you guys in me putting it in. Did that make sense? Is below in the description box. And I thank you for sticking around all the way to the bitter end. And I hope it was well worth your valuable time. And just thank you for letting me share with you so many of the things that YouTube taught me about how to make a watercolor portrait. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, which will be out next week. And I hope that you have an absolutely beautiful day. Bye-bye.